Graduation day was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life, not because of the ceremony, not because of the speeches, but because my son Ethan had done something every doctor once said he couldn't. Ethan was born with a condition that made walking difficult. From the time he was little, he'd had braces on his legs and spent most of his childhood in and out of physical therapy. He was quiet, reserved, and gentle, the kind of kid who always thanked the nurse after getting a shot. The world hadn't always been kind to him, but he faced it with a courage that humbled me. And now, after years of struggle, he was walking, not perfectly, not quickly, but proudly, across a stage to receive his high school diploma. I'd been a judge for nearly 20 years, and I'd seen just about every form of arrogance, cruelty, and injustice. But nothing in my courtroom could ever move me the way Ethan's smile did when he tried on his cap and gown that morning. The whole family was excited, except, of course, for Karen, our self-appointed HOA tyrant. Karen Holt, president of the Maple Creek HOA, destroyer of good moods, queen of rule enforcement. She lived 2 doors down from us in a house that looked like a catalog display, every flower measured, every curtain perfectly straight. And for some reason, she had made it her mission to make our lives miserable ever since we moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago. Her first complaint came within a week. Your wheelchair ramp doesn't match the community color palette. Then it was about Ethan's therapy van being too large for our driveway. Then about our unauthorized flag, an American flag, by the way, hanging near the porch. I'd ignored most of her nonsense over the years, too busy with the court and Ethan's care to waste energy on petty HOA drama. But that woman's obsession with power was something I'd never seen before. She thrived on control, and the more people ignored her, the harder she pushed. When the school announced that the graduation ceremony would be held at the community field, land technically overseen by the HOA, I knew there would be trouble. I just didn't expect it to come from Karen personally. That morning, I was loading a few chairs and a cooler into the back of my truck when I noticed her standing on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand. Her blonde hair was pulled tight into a bun, sunglasses perched on her nose, and she was frowning like she'd smelled something rotten. "Morning, Judge Miller," she said in that overly polite tone that always made my skin crawl. "I see you're bringing a vehicle onto HOA grass property today." "It's not HOA property," I said, keeping my voice even. "The school rented the field for the graduation." Karen clicked her pen. "Yes, but community bylaws state that non-residents and vehicles without parking permits are subject to fines." "Karen," I said, staring her dead in the eyes, "this is high school graduation. My son is graduating today. Maybe you could, just for once, not act like a hall monitor." Her smile didn't waver. "Rules are rules, Judge." I exhaled slowly. I'd spent my entire career keeping my composure while people in court screamed, cried, and lied. But somehow, this woman testing the limits of community guidelines managed to get under my skin more than any criminal ever had. By the time we arrived at the field, the sun was shining, the chairs were filling up, and Ethan was sitting with his classmates near the stage, his braces glinting in the light. My wife, Laura, was practically glowing with pride. I could see Ethan scanning the crowd, and when he spotted us, his grin stretched from ear to ear. For a moment, all the noise, all the frustration, all the nonsense with Karen, it disappeared. Until she showed up again. Karen was pacing near the sound booth, arguing with the volunteer staff. From the snippets I caught, she was complaining about unauthorized tents and safety violations. She even had the audacity to call the local security detail to inspect the area. I shook my head. The woman couldn't stand not being in charge. The ceremony began beautifully. The principal spoke, the choir sang, and then the rows of students started to move toward the stage. One by one, names were called, applause filled the air, and parents wiped away proud tears. Then came Ethan's turn. He stood up slowly, gripping his cane with determination. The crowd quieted as he took his first steps toward the stage. It was a long walk, 30 feet, maybe more, and every step was deliberate, steady, strong. People began to clap softly, then louder still. Even the principal was tearing up. But then, Karen moved. She had been standing near the edge of the stage, waving at one of the staff members. Suddenly, she started arguing again about some supposed trip hazard from the decorations on the stage stairs, and before anyone could stop her, she yanked at the fabric covering the side railing. The railing shifted, just slightly, but enough that when Ethan took his final step onto the stage, his cane caught on the edge. He stumbled forward. Gasps filled the air as he fell hard onto the wooden planks. My heart dropped. I was on my feet before anyone else moved. Laura screamed his name. Teachers rushed forward. Karen froze, eyes wide, realizing what she'd done, though she didn't say a word. Ethan wasn't crying. He was trying to push himself up, his face red with embarrassment more than pain. He looked at the audience, hundreds of people staring, and whispered, "I'm okay." The applause that followed wasn't just for his diploma. It was for his strength, his resilience, his refusal to let that fall define the moment. But for me, standing there, watching Karen pretend like nothing happened, something inside me burned cold. This wasn't just an accident. This was a line crossed one too many times. And Karen Holt was about to learn that you don't humiliate or endanger my family and walk away smiling. Not when the man you just provoked happens to be a judge. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation for Ethan, though I could hardly hear any of it through the pounding in my chest. My wife had tears in her eyes, but they weren't just tears of pride. They were tears of quiet fury. She'd seen it too. Karen had tugged at that railing. She'd caused that fall, and everyone in our row knew it. Ethan, being who he was, downplayed the whole thing. "Dad, it's fine," he whispered as I helped him into the truck afterward. "It was just a fall. Nobody meant it." But the moment I saw Karen laughing near the refreshment table, holding a cup of lemonade like she hadn't just humiliated my son in front of an entire town, that last shred of patience I had evaporated. That night, after Ethan was safely in bed, I sat in my home office surrounded by law books and court transcripts, the tools of my trade. But this time, it wasn't a criminal or civil case I was building, it was personal. I started by making a few calls. The first was to Officer Daniels, a local police sergeant I'd known for over a decade. "Daniels," I said, "I need a favor. There was an incident today at Maple Creek Field involving a community safety violation. I want the full report and any statements given." There was a pause. "Judge Miller, you talking about the graduation thing?" "Yeah, we got a call from one of the HOA board members, Karen Holt, I think. She said there was an unfortunate slip." I clenched my jaw. An unfortunate slip. That was how she described nearly injuring my disabled son in public. Daniels continued, "We took some photos of the stage setup before it was cleared. You might want to see those. Email them to me," I said, my voice tight. When the pictures came through, I stared at them for a long time. The railing she'd tampered with was clearly loose, screws missing, fabric torn. Someone had tried to fix it hastily with tape, but the damage was obvious. And right there in the background of one shot, captured perfectly by accident, was Karen herself, her hand gripping the fabric seconds before the fall. That was enough to confirm what I already knew. But I wasn't after petty revenge. Not yet. I wanted to understand why. So, the next morning, I did something unusual for a judge. I went to the HOA office. The office was really just a small building behind the Maple Creek clubhouse. When I walked in, Karen was sitting behind the counter with her reading glasses perched on her nose, flipping through papers like a queen sorting through taxes. She looked up, her smile tight and fake. "Judge Miller," she said sweetly, "how's your son? Such a shame about what happened yesterday." "Shame is one word for it," I said calmly. "You were seen interfering with the stage setup, weren't you?" Her smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, I was simply trying to prevent an accident. The decorations were loose. It's not my fault he tripped. Not your fault." I repeated, my voice lowering. "Karen, that railing came apart in your hands. My son could have been seriously hurt." Her eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Judge, your son's condition isn't my responsibility. Maybe he shouldn't have been walking up those stairs at all." That did it. The words were like gasoline on an open flame. I took a slow step forward. Let me make something very clear. I said, each word deliberate. If you ever speak about my son like that again, you'll need more than an HOA to protect you. Karen's face went pale, but she tried to hold her ground. This is harassment. You can't threaten me. Threaten? I said, pulling out my phone. No, Karen. I'm simply informing you that what you did yesterday was caught on camera. I have witness statements, photos, and a police report. You endangered a disabled student during a public event. That's not just negligence, it's criminal recklessness. She blinked, her confidence cracking. You wouldn't— Oh, I would, I said coldly. But I'm not done. For the next few days, I began quietly digging into the Maple Creek HOA's operations. As a judge, I had access to public filings, and what I found made my stomach turn. The HOA's accounts were a mess: misused funds, unauthorized fees, and shady property assessments. And at the center of all of it, Karen Holt's signature. She'd been pocketing HOA funds through fake maintenance contracts and consulting fees. She wasn't just a petty bully, she was a fraud. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to make her regret every smug word she'd ever said to me. But I wasn't going to march into her office and shout. No, that wasn't my way. I was a man of law, and I was going to destroy her legally. The next Monday, I made a quiet call to the district attorney's office, not as a judge, but as a citizen submitting a report. I provided the documents, the statements, and the proof of her misconduct. I didn't even need to attach my name. The evidence spoke loudly enough. 2 days later, Karen's world began to crumble. The police arrived at the HOA office with warrants. The community board was notified. Word spread like wildfire that the beloved HOA president was under investigation for fraud and endangerment. By the end of the week, she was suspended from her position. But that wasn't enough for me. Not yet. She still hadn't learned what it meant to feel the humiliation, the fear, the helplessness she had made my son feel. And I had a way to make that lesson sink in. One that would make her cry in front of the same people she'd always tried to impress. That's when I called in a favor from someone Karen would never expect to see again. Her ex-husband. I've spent 20 years on the bench telling people that evidence matters more than anger, that the law is a kind of slow-acting medicine. It doesn't always feel good going down, but it heals the wound. So, when the anger inside me wanted to burn Karen Holt down the same way she tried to burn my son's courage, I leaned on the quieter tools I'd always trusted: paperwork, witnesses, and procedure. The difference this time was that I wasn't sitting in a courtroom doling out justice. I was the plaintiff, the parent, a citizen with a righteous cause, and I had a stack of facts that wouldn't be denied. I started by letting the criminal investigators do their work. The county detectives were thorough, the good kind of thorough, the sort who don't act on gossip, but on trace evidence, sworn testimony, chain of custody reports. They re-interviewed volunteers, looked through event logs, and combed the campus surveillance for every camera angle that could show the sequence of the railing being loosened. The picture that emerged was ugly in its clarity. Karen's hand on the railing, the fabric pulled, the missing screws, the hurried attempt to tape it back before the ceremony. All the little things that turn a mean-spirited stunt into a criminal recklessness charge. While the detectives gathered the criminal file, I worked the other end, the HOA's finances. That was where Karen's arrogance had always shown itself, not just in how she coached her neighbors to fear her clipboard, but in the way she treated the association like a personal petty bank. I wasn't naive about how tenacious people get when their livelihood or pride is threatened, so I hired a private forensic accountant through a contact of mine. A judge can't micromanage an investigation without risking recusal or worse, but a judge can hire competent people and provide critical leads. The accountant started with the HOA's published minutes and bank statements. Public records are public for a reason, then dug into the consultant invoices Karen had signed off on. What he found made my jaw ache. Shell companies duplicate invoices, payments for safety audits that matched invoices to companies with P.O. boxes and no employees. dozens of small checks that, when added up, traced back to a few lavish personal purchases, a landscape redesign for Karen's property, a private contractor who mysteriously did a special fence repair at night near my driveway, and an expensive tablet with a contractor's logo engraved on the back. No board bids, no contracts confirmed by quorum votes, just Karen's initials rubber-stamped on approvals. I had the accountant compile everything into a clean packet: timelines, bank reconstructions, witness statements, and the event photos. Paul helped me organize the civil portion: a demand letter for damages, a civil suit for negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a petition to the HOA's oversight board to remove her permanently. That part was paperwork and process, and I handled it the way I always had: calm, precise, unassailable. Then I made a call that changed the whole calculus. It wasn't flashy, it was the sort of call you make when you need the truth from a person who knows where the bodies are buried. I called Karen's ex-husband, Martin Holt. People think exes are predictable, either bitter or oblivious. Martin turned out to be neither. He had divorced Karen years before their HOA rise, and the separation left him with a quiet, tired face and a willingness to talk when the right prod came from the right source. He met me in a diner at dawn, coffee and pie between us, and when I laid out what the detectives and the accountant had found, he didn't flinch. Instead, he began to tell me what no paper could show: the inside patterns, the way Karen loved the attention of making decisions, the soft coercions, the late-night phone calls to contractors with the plea, "Make sure it looks legal." He produced emails from his old account, messages he'd kept out of spite at the time, showing Karen coordinating the annexation of town property lines, drafting letters to timid board members, and encouraging the creative use of notices. His cooperation wasn't just moral, it was instrumental. You can't overstate how much a credible insider will collapse a defense. With Martin's sworn affidavit and the accountant's packet, the county prosecutor felt comfortable moving forward. She called a press conference announcing an official investigation into potential fraud, tampering with public safety, and a criminal negligence inquiry stemming from the graduation incident. Once that balloon rose, everyone who harbored quiet complaints about Karen started to call in, one by one. The school's event manager who'd been pressured to bend safety protocols, the stagehand who'd been told to discreetly keep things tidy, neighbors who'd been fined for flags and porches and patios for reasons that suddenly looked petty and vengeful. The next week felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. An emergency HOA meeting convened, and for the first time the room was full of people who didn't politely defer to Karen. They read the allegations aloud: forged meeting minutes, unauthorized payments, and now the accusation that she'd interfered with a public event leading to endangerment of a minor with a disability. The board voted unanimously, a startling unity that only comes from people who realize they've been misled, to suspend her pending the county's probe. Karen was furious. Her voice was high and brittle as she accused everyone of conspiracy. The board had the records. The motion passed. Meanwhile, the detectives made a small but crucial discovery. A local hardware store's CCTV had captured Karen purchasing heavy-duty tape and a box of screws the morning before the ceremony. The screws matched the type that were pried from the stage railing. That, combined with Martin's affidavit and the surveillance footage of her hand on the fabric, pushed the prosecutor to convene a grand jury. The grand jury returned indictments: reckless endangerment, tampering with public safety equipment, and a charge of conspiracy relating to the HOA's financial misconduct. When the indictment dropped, Karen's facade finally cracked. She had always loved being in the spotlight when the spotlight meant power. She hated the spotlight that came with accountability. Reporters circled like vultures. Her phone began to ring off the hook with neighbors who wanted their fines reimbursed. The HOA's board had to appoint an interim manager and an outside auditor to review 3 years of accounts. Every corner of the pleasant, manicured community that Karen had curated began to smell faintly of rot. But I wasn't satisfied with merely tearing down her platform. Justice needs to be comprehensive to be meaningful. So I filed civil claims, not only for my son's humiliation and distress, but for every family I'd found who'd been financially hurt by her inflated HOA fees and bogus work orders. The civil filings named multiple victims and demanded restitution. With class action potential, the leverage shifted from the petty bureaucracy that had once made her untouchable to a river of claims that could never be ignored. Karen predictably tried to defend herself by attacking me, a thin, desperate tactic. She accused me of abusing my position to bully her of engineering a witch hunt. Her lawyer even sent a letter seeking my recusal from any involvement in prosecutorial conversations. I welcomed it. There's virtue in transparency. I recused myself formally from any judicial oversight related to the case, stepping away from any official capacity, so my role as a citizen and father could not be mischaracterized. That decision made the prosecutor's office's eventual indictment and the civil claims all the more credible. No one could accuse the process of being tainted by judicial influence. In the weeks that followed, I watched the slow geometry of accountability reshape a community. Neighbors who'd once allowed fear to be their currency began asking for full refunds of fines for records of meetings and for audits of HOA spending. The county placed the HOA under temporary federal supervision while investigators finished forensic accounting. The contractor who'd done night work near my fence was subpoenaed. His initial eyes cracked under oath. Volunteers whispered thanks in grocery lines. Ethan, quiet, proud Ethan, began to walk with a small bounce again, the ache of embarrassment easing as people offered apologies and the school presented him with an honorary commendation for courage. And Karen? She grew smaller with each revelation. The first time she came to the grocery store after the indictments, she stood hunched by the citrus, eyes darting as if searching for an ally. She had none. Her friends were few and scared, the same kind of scared that once made neighbors do what she suggested without question. She tried to organize a town hall to clear her name, but the room filled with victims who had their own stories to tell, and the truth drowned out whatever defenses she had left. One evening, as dusk bled into the neighborhood, I sat on our porch with Ethan leaning against my shoulder, and I felt a complex, tired satisfaction. This hadn't been some impulsive revenge. It had been methodical and rooted in the very thing Karen thought would never touch her: process. The law had moved at its measured pace, and in doing so, it had given voice to the small and the scared. It had forced her into public view, into scrutiny, into the place where everyone could finally see her for who she was. The grand jury's indictment was the legal punctuation mark. The civil suits were the corrective sentences. The garden of quiet power she'd tended, fines, whispers, petty tyrannies, was uprooted, its soil exposed. It would take time for the HOA to heal. There were meetings, audits, and restitution negotiations ahead. But the essential truth remained. She could no longer terrorize a child's triumph and expect to walk away. Ethan slept deeply that night. He'd had a few setbacks in therapy afterward, understandable, but the community rallied in earnest now. Neighbors brought casseroles, kids left handmade cards, and the PDA organized a day of kindness in his honor. People who had once followed Karen's word now lined up to apologize. Whether they meant it or were ashamed, I don't entirely care. Apology in action is better than silence. The criminal process would toll on for months, but already the thing Karen had most feared was gone: adoration. The neighborly reverence that had given her the power to act so brazenly had evaporated. She watched as the law, not me, not anyone's personal vengeance, did its work. And for someone who had built her identity on being above consequence, the slow humiliation of being accountable was the most severe sentence of all. At home, I tucked Ethan into bed and kissed his forehead. "You're brave," I told him, and meaning it in a way that had nothing to do with the courtroom and everything to do with surviving the day the world decided, finally, to respect him. By the time the trial began, nearly 8 months had passed since that cursed graduation day. The weather had shifted from the dry summer heat that carried dust across the school's field to the kind of heavy winter mist that clung to the windows and swallowed the sound of tires on asphalt. But the world hadn't forgotten what Karen Holt had done. Not the news outlets, not the county, and certainly not us. The courthouse was packed. Even though I wasn't presiding, everyone knew who I was. The father, the judge, the man who had watched his disabled son fall from a stage because a petty tyrant couldn't stand to see a family be proud of themselves. Karen sat at the defense table, her once perfect composure replaced with visible exhaustion. Her sharp bob had grown uneven, her eyes were rimmed with sleepless red, and her hands trembled when she turned the pages of her lawyer's folder. Gone was the smug HOA queen who had once dictated lawn colors and fence heights. What sat before me was a woman stripped of power, clinging to denial like it was oxygen. The prosecution opened with the footage. They dimmed the lights, and there it was on the large monitor. The moment she tugged the fabric on that stage, the missing screws in the railing, and the split second where my son fell, Ethan turned his face away. I didn't blame him. Every time I saw it, it carved something fresh into me. When the footage ended, the prosecutor said, quietly, this was no accident. This was a pattern of cruelty disguised as control. The defense tried to spin it, of course. They said Karen didn't intend harm, that she only wanted to adjust the setup, that she was acting in the interest of aesthetics. But then came the witnesses, the school custodian who saw her tampering with the railing, the hardware store owner who sold her the tape and screws, and finally her ex-husband Martin, calm, steady, and devastatingly clear. Martin described the years of manipulation, the fraud, the threats to board members who questioned her. He ended with a single line that silenced the room. She doesn't make mistakes, she makes decisions, and then she hides them. When he said that, Karen broke. The courtroom fell silent except for her quiet sobs. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, but even he seemed to know it was over. The verdict came after only 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: reckless endangerment, tampering with safety equipment, HOA fraud, and willful neglect leading to injury. The judge ordered restitution to the victims, full removal from any HOA authority for life, and community service once her prison term ended. But for me, the justice wasn't in the verdict. It was in the quiet that followed. The long, heavy silence where the people she had bullied for years sat still, finally free of her shadow. After the sentencing, the local paper ran a story titled "Judge's Son Inspires Reform." County overhauls HOA regulations. The county announced a new oversight committee to prevent abuse of power in neighborhood associations. For once, change came from tragedy that didn't get buried. That night, when I returned home, Ethan was waiting on the porch, the light from the window catching his face. He didn't say anything, just handed me a folded paper, a drawing of our family standing together on a stage, smiling. The railing in the drawing was whole again. I fixed it, he said softly. I hugged him so tightly, he laughed, and for the first time since that horrible day, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. In the following weeks, the community slowly began to rebuild. Karen's house went up for auction, seized to pay damages. The same neighbors who once bowed to her began planting flowers on their lawns again, choosing colors that she would have banned. The air felt lighter, freer, like the entire neighborhood had exhaled after holding its breath for years. On the day her property sold, I drove past the street where it stood. The for sale sign had a bright red sticker across it. Sold. Through the window, I could see her empty living room, stripped bare, no furniture, no power, no authority. That evening, I stood with Ethan at my father's old memorial garden, a place Karen once tried to have relocated for being unsightly. The wind rustled the flags, the air crisp with pine and memory. "She's gone, Dad," Ethan said. "Does that mean it's over?" I looked at him, at the strength that had returned his eyes, and smiled. "It means we can start again." And we did. The next year, Ethan graduated again, this time from college with a degree in mechanical design. He walked across the stage under a brand new canopy, the railings reinforced and gleaming in the sun. The principal invited me to speak, but I declined. It wasn't my story to tell anymore. It was his. When he shook hands with the dean, the crowd erupted in applause. My son once humiliated and broken by a hateful neighbor, now stood taller than anyone in that hall. As I watched him throw his cap into the air, I felt the last of my anger dissolve into the wind. Justice hadn't just punished Karen, it had healed what she tried to destroy. And somewhere deep down, I hoped she saw the news from whatever cell she sat in and realized that in the end, it wasn't revenge that destroyed her. It was truth,